So last time we ranked all of the Nat 5 collab families, so it only makes sense for us to round out the list and rank the Nat 4s now. Quick disclaimer. Actually, no disclaimer. I'm sick of disclaimers. Starting us off, which is not where you want to be in the rank. Well, actually, one disclaimer. This list is based off of impact. First of all, starting us off, which is not where you want to be on a list of rankings, it's the Magic Order Enchantresses. And this might be a little bit of bias coming through, because I have 2 of the light one. So this placement on the list might be a little unfair for the Enchantresses. There's only 2 Nat 4s in this entire family. Neither of them is that impactful in the grand scheme of things, I'd say. The Nat 5s in the family are really good, though. So maybe a little bit of time and some elbow grease is all they need to become respectable Nat 4s, but for now, I think this is a good spot for them. Next, it's another family with only 2 Nat 4s in it. It's the Mercenary Queens. Solveig and Astrid are the fire and wind ones, respectively. The fire one is a damage dealer, and the wind one can detonate dots. So both are interesting under very specific circumstances. The 5 stars in this family are off the charts. The 4 stars leave a little to be desired, and that's okay. And if you're curious, the wind one actually has a spotlight on the channel. Then we've got the Desert Warriors. Their scaling on skill 1 just changed in the most recent balance patch, so it now scales with attack and HP, which makes a little bit more of synergistic sense for when you go to build one of these guys. And I still think that the light one could potentially work with the Water Slayer if you're planning on incorporating the buffed Borgnine into any of your comps. Moving right along, it's the Magic Order Elementalists. Lumina actually has a really cool passive. It's called Chain Reaction, and it essentially spreads dots to enemies as they take damage. So basically, it makes continuous damage effects contagious. Very cool idea. This family may just need a minute to breathe, because at the time of recording, they're still pretty new. I'd say that it would make sense for the 4-star Gladiatrices to make it around here on the list. The 4-star varieties of this family have not seen quite as much play as their 5-star sisters, even though they have potentially really cool effects like AoE stunning for 2 turns. Aurelia is the light Gladiatrix, and she offers exactly that, but the activation rate is a little bit low, and I think folks are looking for something a little more reliable following an AoE strip. And then the water one sounds kind of hype too, in the way that it inverts the elemental relationship between water and wind. Let's move on to the one we've all been waiting for. It's the Steel Commanders, specifically Evan. I've worked too dang long and hard to not talk about Evan. I just wish he was better. The passive on the Dark One allows him to attack additionally on his turn, and if he's attacking a light attribute monster, it deals 100% increased damage. Now, that additional hit can't be counterattacked, though I think the other 2 can. So that additional hit always lands as a critical. So in theory, you could put him on full crit damage with 0 crit rate and just watch the numbers fly out thanks to that additional hit. Unfortunately, his scaling is what's keeping him back. The Wind one in this family is also a 4-star. Let's move on. Nah, I'm just kidding. We'll talk about the Wind one. His name's Hector, and I actually think that his 3rd skill has quite a bit of potential. Has a little bit of attack bar reduction, increases the enemy's cooldown times, and then reduces your team's cooldown times. So this is where the Steel Commanders are going to land for now, but I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement in the future. Okay, now we're getting into a pretty cool portion of the list. Next up, it's the Choco Knights. I think we can all agree that these monsters have a great design. In fact, I'm a little bit inclined to say that they might have even inspired the Second Awakenings for the Living Armors, but I have nothing to base that off of other than the fact that they both feature floating shields. Coincidence? Maybe not. Who knows? The Dark One offers some long 3-turn defense breaks, a stun, and more, plus max HP scaling damage. But I think the standout from this whole family is probably the Wind one, thanks to a 19% backup speed lead and attack bar boost that includes an attack buff and a crit rate buff. And at the time of recording, it's actually seeing some play in cleave comps. That's how you know we've gotten to the juicy part of the list. Now, the black Tea Bunnies are actually a really stacked family. The fire one is even seen use in raids, the water one freezes and has a passive that'll benefit from that freeze and also keep enemies frozen for longer. And the dark one evens out HP ratios and does damage. I've actually gotten cloven by a dark one in the past. Next, let's talk about the Magic Order Sword Singers. These monsters are still pretty fresh in the game, but I just want to point out the fire one's passive is really cool on paper. I admittedly have not been in a situation where I've been staring down the barrel of a loaded fire Magic Order Sword Singer, but she offers increased crit rate based on your speed, and then if your crit rate would exceed 100%, the rest is adapted into crit damage. That's pretty hot. And the dark one, Fiona, got a lot of people excited for a very good reason. It's got AoE strip and slow. Notably, those two effects don't have an activation rate, so they will try to happen. Accuracy and resistance checks still go off, but it's not like a 75% chance to activate. It will just activate. Couple that with some speed scaling damage down the line, and you've got yourself a really solid strip option. Next up, it's the Poison Masters. And I would say that the efforts of Kyle are enough to put them at this spot. But people also really like Heckerson. Or at least they like just saying the name Heckerson. Actually, speaking of Heckerson, he could potentially be pretty synergistic with the recently buffed Borgnine, the Water Slayer. Now that he increases the amount of damage dealt to enemies with destroyed HP, there's something going on there. We should investigate that. And honestly, I always wanted Cade. Ragdoll, but for debuffs, is a fantastic elevator pitch. Imagine that with Jessica or like Ongyuki. It's thematically very cool. In fact, you could actually kind of build a comp now that is all about just having debuffs on and getting unexpected benefits from that. So enough about them. Back to Kyle. Kyle is being used pretty ubiquitously across a lot of speed teams for different content in the game right now. Most notably, Dragon's Abyss Hard. Once he's fully skilled up, he'll be getting additional turns and dealing out big damage thanks to defense break on his skill too. When the comp works, it's incredibly fun to watch. And he also has a relevant attack lead to support the team. Then we've got the Neostone Fighters. With the exception of Lucas and Trevor, the others just see niche use. Though as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that Carl could actually be used for the Dimension Raid because skills that ignore damage reduction effects are necessary there. Trevor, though, is one of the original counters to Leo. I absolutely adore his passive. Doing more damage as you take damage is a fun risk-reward style of play, and Lucas can deal some big numbers when he's got a big enough shield. The Rift Beasts are still traumatized from that one bug. You remember that? They remember. Next, we've got the Neostone Agents. You know what I just realized is that the Neostone Agents and the Neostone Fighters are the only collab units that don't have Summoners War Originals. Huh. Interesting. Something to note too is that the martial artists are also from this same collaboration, but they're not 4 stars, so they won't make an appearance on this list. So Sylvia could only pull so much weight in the Nat 5 lists, but the 4-star Neostone Agents have been with us for some time now, and they have contributed significantly to a lot of folks' time in Summoners War. Like, I remember using Lisa's Cleanse and Team Up effect in raids. Olivia is also a staple setup unit for defense-based cleave comps in Guild Wars. And then Ileana was at one point voted to be the #1 support unit in the game during one of our Twitch streams. She's honestly still amazing. Invincibility, immunity, plus turn cycling, that's a crazy skill set. So these monsters definitely deserve to be this high up on the list. But it feels wrong to call just people monsters, but you know. Moving on. Finally, it's the Blade Dancers. Leah and Verisa are enough to bring them up this far, but all of them offer great effects. Berenice is the fire one, and she has an attack bar boost with a speed buff and a crit rate buff. That's an incredibly difficult combination of abilities to find. The water and wind one both ignore defense under different circumstances, but the light and dark ones are where this family really shines. Verisa brings an AoE strip to the table that also attack breaks and applies glancing. So that means after you're done removing all that immunity and attack buff, the clapback is severely reduced. It's also anti-counterattack to a certain degree thanks to that glancing debuff. And then we've all seen Leah's potential speed scaling damage. She is a staple for arena offenses, RTA cleaves, and more. So there we go. Those are the Nat 4 families ranked. Let me know if your list looks different than mine, or maybe just, you know, like the Nat 5s. Maybe just give me your top 5. Because otherwise it's going to be, I'm asking you to write a lot. And I don't, you know, only if you're up for it. But I'd read it if you wanted to.